Introduction. Friends, if you're excited to watch a thrilling and emotional roller coaster packed into one unforgettable story, then you're in for a treat, because today's video is all about the movie September 2024. If you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe so you stay updated with all the latest film breakdowns. In today's video, we're going to dive deep into this amazing movie called September 2024. We'll talk about what this film is all about, where you can watch it, and reveal all the interesting facts that make it a must-watch. I'm going to give you all the details about which OTT platform or satellite channel will be streaming this film so you don't miss a single moment. We'll also cover everything about the technical side of the movie, from its music and background score to its cinematography, editing, pre-production, filming style, and post-production work. We'll go over the film's budget and how much it's expected to earn at the box office. Not only that, but I'll also share a short review of the movie's story and tell you what makes it stand out. Along with that, we'll explore the full storyline, cast, performances, and who plays which role in this gripping film. That's why I request you all to stay with us till the end of this video. So, let's get started. September 2024 doesn't just tell a story, it unpacks a memory, stitches it back together, and lets you feel the ache of time, regret, and hope all at once. Right from the first frame, you know you're in for something different. It opens quietly, almost delicately, with a soft, personal moment that feels like a whisper from the past. There's no flashy exposition or forced introductions. Instead, it invites you in with slow-burn intrigue. The film doesn't follow a traditional three-act structure. Instead, it dances with time. Moments from the past and present flow into each other, not in confusion, but in a way that mirrors the way memory works, fragmented, hazy, yet emotionally precise. You'll find yourself jumping between years, sometimes mid-scene, but the shifts are seamless, always emotionally charged, and never gimmicky. At the heart of the story is a character caught between what was and what could have been. A tragedy looms large, one that happened on a fateful day in September, and it ripples through everything. Every relationship in the film, whether it's romantic, familial, or platonic, is shaped by this moment. The tension doesn't come from external threats or high-speed chases. It's the kind of internal, personal conflict that cuts deeper. A single decision, a missed opportunity, a quiet betrayal, they form the spine of the narrative. But even with all this introspection, the story moves. There are key turning points where everything shifts. A letter is found, a secret is revealed, a confrontation erupts that changes the course of the story. These moments don't explode, they simmer, and that makes them all the more powerful. As the characters drift through these interconnected timelines, the film plays with perspective. Sometimes you see an event from two different angles, what one character believed happened versus what actually took place. This adds layers to the emotional weight, forcing you to question who's right, who's wrong, and whether truth is ever really that simple. The emotional core never fades. Whether it's a small look exchanged across a table or an emotional breakdown in the rain, the storytelling stays grounded in raw, human emotion. There's a lingering sense of melancholy, but it's not without moments of levity or beauty. There are scenes so poetic in their silence that they say more than any monologue ever could. By the time the story reaches its final act, you're not waiting for a plot twist, you're waiting for emotional closure. And the film delivers in a way that feels earned. It circles back to the opening, but now with a completely different emotional resonance. The echoes of earlier scenes come full circle, and everything clicks, not with a bang, but with a deeply satisfying thud in your chest. This isn't a story that hurries. It breathes. It mourns. It hopes. And by the time it fades out, it leaves you feeling like you've lived an entire lifetime in the span of 2 hours. The characters in September 2024 aren't just players in a story. They feel like people you've known for years, people you might have loved, resented, or even become. Each of them walks into the film carrying invisible baggage, and the beauty lies in how that weight slowly becomes visible. The protagonist, quiet, introspective, clearly haunted, is someone whose transformation isn't loud or flashy. You watch them evolve in the way they pause before speaking, in how their gaze lingers a second too long, in the choices they don't make until it's almost too late. That's the kind of growth you don't see often. It doesn't come from big speeches or dramatic realizations. It comes from quiet unraveling and hard-won self-awareness. Then there's the supporting cast, none of whom feel like filler. Every character has a purpose, a backstory hinted at in glances, dialogue, or the way they react to the protagonist. The best part? No one is entirely good or bad. You see flaws, contradictions, and vulnerabilities in all of them. There's a character who seems cold at first, emotionally distant, almost cruel, but as the layers peel back, you realize their armor comes from grief, not malice. Another character, initially warm and supportive, turns out to be hiding something that shakes the emotional core of the film. These revelations aren't there for shock value. They deepen the relationships, sharpen the tension, and make every reunion, every confrontation, every farewell feel earned. Relationships evolve organically. Some bonds fray under pressure. Others grow stronger through shared pain. The dynamic between the protagonist and a key family member shifts dramatically, from silence and avoidance to vulnerability and understanding. It's not easy or sudden, but when that emotional bridge finally builds, it hits hard. And the love story, if you can even call it that, isn't about fairy tale romance. It's messy, layered, and filled with unfinished sentences. There's history, bitterness, tenderness, and all of it tangled together in a way that feels deeply human. Motivations are another strong suit here. Every choice made by a character, no matter how small, is anchored in something believable. You understand why someone would walk away, why someone else would stay, and why a character might keep a painful secret rather than tell the truth. These motivations shift over time as the characters confront their past, and it's those subtle shifts that really shape the emotional trajectory of the film. The arcs don't bend neatly, but they do bend. You see people make mistakes, learn from them, and sometimes repeat them before they finally grow. In September 2024, the story moves forward because the characters change. Their inner struggles become the engine driving the plot. It's less about what happens next, and more about who these people become in the process. That's what makes it feel so alive, like you're watching real lives unfold, not just scripted performances. By the end, you don't just understand these characters. You feel like a part of their journey, bruises and all. The performances in September 2024 don't just serve the story. They are the story. Every emotion, every pause, every flicker in the actor's eyes feels lived in and real, like they're not performing but remembering. The lead actor delivers something quietly magnetic. They don't rely on grand monologues or tearful breakdowns. Instead, they carry the entire emotional weight of the film in the smallest gestures, the way their voice trembles when they're holding back, the way they flinch at memories unspoken, the stillness they sink into when words aren't enough. It's a performance built on restraint, and that restraint somehow says more than any explosion of emotion ever could. You believe this character. You ache with them. You understand their silence, even when nothing is explained out loud. Then there's the person playing the former love interest, a standout performance that adds a raw, aching texture to the entire film. They bring this mix of warmth and sorrow that makes every scene feel like a reunion and a goodbye at the same time. There's a scene in the middle of the film, just a conversation at a kitchen table, and yet the chemistry between these two actors turns it into one of the most emotionally charged moments in the movie. No shouting, no theatrics, just two people whose eyes say everything they're afraid to. The supporting cast doesn't miss a beat either. A character who serves as the protagonist's anchor in the present timeline delivers a performance grounded in empathy and quiet strength. Their role may not have the flashiest dialogue, but the sincerity they bring lights up every scene they're in. There's also a secondary character, a sibling perhaps, whose performance adds a jagged, almost confrontational energy that balances the film's more introspective tone. They challenge, they provoke, and they expose truths the protagonist would rather avoid. And it works because the actor behind that role knows exactly how to dial in just the right amount of intensity without going overboard. Even brief roles feel essential thanks to how committed every performer is. A neighbor who only appears in 1 or 2 scenes leaves a lasting impression, not because of what they say, but because the actor gives them a sense of history. You get the feeling that even the smallest characters have entire stories of their own, just waiting off screen. What makes the performances so effective isn't just the emotion, it's the nuance. The actors understand the weight of silence. They know when to let a moment breathe, and when to let it burn. There's no overacting, no one trying to steal the spotlight. Instead, it's a cast that works in complete harmony with the story's tone, subtle, aching, deeply human. The emotional depth of the film is built one expression at a time, and it's the actors who make that depth resonate. You don't watch them. You feel them. And that's the kind of acting that lingers long after the credits roll. The direction in September 2024 is the invisible hand that guides everything, quietly but confidently. It's not about flashy tricks or over-the-top flair. It's about precision, control, and emotional intuition. From the very first scene, the director sets a tone that feels deeply intimate, almost like a secret being whispered to the audience. The color palette is muted but deliberate, filled with soft grays, autumn golds, and dusky blues, creating a feeling of memory rather than moment. Every shot feels carefully curated, not in a showy way, but in a way that makes you realize how much thought has gone into the visual storytelling. The pacing is slow and deliberate, but not sluggish. It's the kind of pacing that allows emotions to land, that lets silences speak louder than dialogue. The director clearly understands that not every story needs to be rushed to feel powerful. There's space here for glances, for pauses, for reflection. And that space makes everything more immersive. You're not watching events unfold. You're inside them. You walk beside the characters. You linger in their memories. You sit with their grief. The transitions between timelines are handled with elegance. There are no abrupt jumps or clunky exposition. Instead, the past and present bleed into each other through visual echoes and smooth, poetic editing choices. A hand reaching for a door in the present mirrors the same gesture from the past. A glance across a room in one timeline reverberates through another scene an hour later. These moments aren't accidental. They're designed with surgical care, and it's the director who stitches them together with such emotional resonance. Shot composition is another quiet triumph. Wide shots are used sparingly but beautifully, often to highlight the isolation or emotional distance between characters. Close-ups, on the other hand, are intimate and almost invasive in the best way. The camera lingers when it needs to, capturing the smallest flicker of emotion. There are moments where the camera doesn't cut away when you expect it to, and that discomfort, that tension is exactly the point. The director isn't afraid to make you sit in those emotionally loaded moments. It's a bold choice, and it pays off every single time. The mood is melancholic, but never manipulative. It doesn't try to tell you how to feel. It simply presents the emotional truth of a scene and lets you absorb it. The director knows when to let the music swell, when to let silence stretch, and when to pull the audience into the deepest emotional current without warning. Even the smallest decisions, like how a character enters a frame or how a room is lit, feel like they're serving a larger narrative vision. There's a deep sense of trust between the director and the audience. You're never spoon-fed anything. Nothing is overly explained. Instead, you're invited to observe, to piece things together, to feel your way through. And that kind of direction requires confidence and clarity. It's the kind of storytelling that respects its viewers, offering a layered experience where every choice, from blocking to lighting to how a line is delivered, builds towards something bigger. More than anything, the direction makes September 2024 feel intentional. Not a single frame is wasted. Every moment is crafted with purpose. The director doesn't just tell a story. They orchestrate a full emotional experience that lingers long after the final shot fades. The cinematography in September 2024 is like a silent narrator, never loud, never demanding attention, but always guiding how you feel and what you see. Every frame feels like it was painted with memory in mind. There's a softness to the visual texture that gives the whole film a dreamlike quality, like you're flipping through an old photo album where some edges are blurred, but the emotions are still razor-sharp. The lighting does so much of the heavy lifting. Natural light floods key moments with warmth and hope, while dim, shadowy interiors lean into sorrow, confusion, or introspection. It's not just about brightness or darkness, it's about emotional temperature. You can almost feel the coldness of a lonely morning or the weight of dusk pressing down on a character lost in thought. Camera angles are used with purpose, not just for visual flair. When a character feels small, overwhelmed, or isolated, the camera doesn't just show it, it makes you feel it. High angles shrink people into their settings, often placing them in wide, lonely spaces that echo their emotional state. On the other hand, low angles are rare but powerful, used only when a character reclaims agency or when a shift in perspective demands attention. The framing constantly reflects what's going on beneath the surface. Two characters might be in the same room, but the space between them on screen tells you everything about their relationship. Symmetry is often broken on purpose, allowing discomfort or imbalance to seep into scenes even when the dialogue remains calm. Close-ups are intimate, but never invasive. They hold long enough for emotions to settle in, capturing the tremble in a lip, the flicker of doubt in an eye, or the moment just before someone breaks. There are scenes that feel almost painterly in their composition. A hallway washed in golden light, a figure silhouetted against a rain-soaked window, a long shot of a deserted field where past and present seem to blur together. These images stay with you, not because they're flashy, but because they hold emotional weight. One standout moment takes place during a memory sequence where the lighting changes mid-shot, shifting from warm nostalgia to a harsher, cooler tone as the truth of the memory cracks open. It's not explained. It's felt. And that's the magic of this cinematography. It works on a level beneath dialogue. It creates atmosphere, yes, but it also creates emotional geography. You know where a character is emotionally before they ever speak. Movement is also used with restraint. There's no shaky cam or constant tracking for the sake of energy. Instead, slow pans and gentle handheld work are favored, letting the story breathe. When the camera does move quickly or abruptly, it's a jolt, used to reflect urgency, chaos, or a rupture in the emotional flow. These shifts never feel random. They're perfectly timed to the internal world of the characters. What truly makes the cinematography sing is how it complements everything else without drawing too much attention to itself. It doesn't beg you to notice it, it just works. It surrounds the characters like a second skin, enhancing every emotional beat, sharpening every moment of silence, and turning the simplest actions, like opening a door or looking out a window, into something visually and emotionally resonant. It's the kind of cinematography that doesn't just show you the story. It makes you feel it frame by frame. The editing in September 2024 isn't about showing off. It's about staying out of the way and letting the emotion guide the rhythm. Every cut, every transition, every breath between scenes feels like it's tuned to the internal beat of the characters. You're not yanked from moment to moment. You're carried. It's a flow that feels more like memory than a timeline, with the pacing bending to what the story needs, not what a formula dictates. Some scenes stretch out longer than you'd expect, but they never overstay. Instead, they let you live in the moment with the characters. A quiet dinner with barely any dialogue may linger for several minutes, but it's filled with loaded silence, subtle glances, the kind of emotional tension that editing allows to simmer rather than explode. The film plays with time, but the transitions are so fluid they don't feel like jumps, they feel like echoes. A door closing in the present cuts to the same door opening years earlier. A conversation fades out and is picked up mid-sentence in another timeline. These seamless transitions aren't just clever, they're meaningful. They mirror how our minds work when we're reflecting, remembering, regretting. It's editing that understands that chronology isn't everything. Emotional continuity matters more. The pacing follows that same idea. It's not fast, but it's deliberate. The slow rhythm allows the weight of every scene to settle. You feel every hesitation, every unspoken word. There's no need to rush through a revelation or a montage over heartbreak. The editing lets things land exactly when they're supposed to. That patience makes the emotional payoff so much more rewarding. But when the story calls for urgency, like in moments where a character's world suddenly collapses, the pace tightens. Cuts become quicker, scenes intercut with rising tension, and that slow burn feeling gives way to a sudden sense of collapse. It's not constant, and that's what makes it hit harder when it happens. The shifts are subtle but powerful, and the editors clearly know when to breathe and when to punch. The rhythm of the film doesn't just affect how the story moves, it affects how it feels. You're lulled into the character's world, their regrets, their hopes, their mistakes. The longer pauses let those feelings sink in. The tighter sequences grab your attention and refuse to let go. There are no jarring cuts, no stylistic jumps just for the sake of variety. Everything has a purpose. Flashbacks blend into the present without title cards or heavy-handed exposition. Even the transitions between scenes, like fading out on a sound instead of an image, add emotional texture. There's one particularly striking moment where the audio from a past conversation continues into a present-day scene, as if the memory is haunting the character in real time. That kind of editing adds layers without drawing attention to itself. The editors clearly trust the audience. They don't spoon-feed information or rush through character development just to get to the next plot point. They allow the film to unfold naturally, matching the emotional arc rather than forcing artificial tempo. It's a film that asks you to lean in, not sit back. And the editing is what keeps you engaged, always moving forward, always connected, even when the story loops back or slows down. It's the kind of invisible craft that does exactly what it should, make the emotions hit harder and the story feel deeper. The soundtrack and score in September 2024 don't scream for attention. They whisper, hum, and occasionally ache right along with the characters. It's one of those rare soundscapes that feels more like a second skin to the story than a background track. The music flows in and out with such delicate timing that sometimes you don't even realize it's there until a scene ends and you feel its absence. That's how deeply it's woven into the fabric of the film. The composer clearly understands that less is more. Instead of loading every emotional scene with a sweeping orchestra, the film often leans into minimalist piano, soft ambient textures, or a single string instrument that carries just enough emotion to let your heart follow along. There's a recurring piano motif that appears like a ghost in different forms, a soft lullaby in one scene, a slowed-down echo in another, and it becomes a kind of emotional signature, like the story's heartbeat. One of the most powerful tools used here is silence. Complete, unbroken silence. No background noise, no score, just the raw sound of the world. In certain scenes, the silence becomes louder than any musical cue could ever be. There's a moment where a character comes face to face with the truth of their past, and instead of swelling strings or dramatic notes, the film drops into total silence, just breath, wind, and the weight of realization. It's haunting, and it lingers. The silence isn't empty. It's filled with tension, grief, and unspoken thoughts, making it a bold and brilliant choice by the sound team. But when the score does come in full force, it's not to overwhelm. It's to elevate. There are moments when the music gently cradles the narrative, especially in montage-like transitions or emotionally climactic scenes. A reunion scene is underscored by a slow-building melody that mirrors the vulnerability of the moment, never rising too high but always supporting the emotion like a safety net. And in contrast, there are sharp, discordant cues used in flashback scenes when memories begin to blur and fracture. These musical shifts don't just signal a change, they feel like the emotional undercurrent being yanked in a new direction. Another strength lies in how the soundtrack never distracts from the performances. The music gives the actors room to breathe, and instead of leading the emotion, it responds to it. You can tell it was composed with sensitivity to the performances, enhancing facial expressions and moments of quiet revelation rather than trying to impose mood from the outside. There's also a restrained use of vocal tracks, maybe one or two, but when they show up, they're placed with intention. A single song during a montage or a reflective scene ties multiple timelines together and carries a powerful nostalgic weight. The sound design blends so well with the score that you sometimes can't tell where ambient sound ends and music begins. The hum of a refrigerator, the rustle of leaves, the creak of a chair, They're all layered with such precision that they become part of the emotional rhythm. It's not just about what you hear. It's about what you feel while you hear it. The music doesn't try to manipulate your reaction. It sits beside you, quietly holding your hand through every scene. And when it lets go, you notice. The overall effect of the score is emotional without ever being sentimental. It enhances without overpowering. It remembers that the story comes first, and its job is to follow, to reflect, and sometimes to step back and let silence say what music can't. September 2024 isn't just a film that tells a story. It peels it open and asks you to sit with the mess of it. It dives deep into themes that aren't just relatable. They're personal, reflective, and quietly haunting. At its core, the film is about memory, not just remembering, but how we carry the past, how it shifts and reshapes itself depending on where we are now. Memory isn't treated like a flashback machine here. It's shown as something fragile, unreliable, sometimes even dangerous. What we choose to remember, what we choose to forget, and what we misremember out of emotional necessity, all of it is layered into the narrative without ever feeling overexplained. That's what makes it hit harder. The film trusts that you'll recognize your own experience in the gaps between scenes, in the silences, in the pauses where words don't come. Another major theme is the concept of time, not just in a sci-fi or literal sense, but emotional time. How grief doesn't follow a clock. How healing doesn't follow a timeline. The film doesn't present life as a series of clean beginnings and endings. It shows how moments echo, how wounds reopen years later, how people change, but never completely escape the versions of themselves they used to be. This is especially felt through the relationships portrayed. Whether it's between lovers, siblings, or parents and children, the film explores how time both erodes and strengthens bonds. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones we understand the least, and sometimes understanding comes too late. Regret is another powerful undercurrent. But it's not presented in a melodramatic way. It's quiet, everyday regret. The kind that builds from all the things left unsaid. The movie asks big questions in small ways. What happens if you don't say what matters until it's too late? What do you do with the weight of a choice you can't undo? Characters wrestle with these questions not through big speeches, but through subtle actions. A phone call never made, a letter never sent, a door never knocked on. The theme of forgiveness runs right alongside it. Not the easy kind. Not the kind where everyone hugs and cries and moves on. This film digs into whether you can truly forgive someone who isn't sorry, or whether you can forgive yourself for something you never apologized for. It explores the cost of holding on and the risk of letting go. There's also a quiet commentary on how people hide behind roles, parent, partner, sibling, friend, and how those identities can become masks we're too afraid to remove. Characters in September 2024 are constantly grappling with who they're supposed to be versus who they actually are. It's a theme that unfolds slowly, but when it clicks, it resonates on a gut level. You begin to see the cracks in their personas, and in doing so, you begin to see your own. And perhaps most surprisingly, despite all its emotional weight, the film doesn't wallow. It threads in the idea of resilience, not the loud, inspirational kind, but the quiet, often invisible endurance of people trying to move forward with broken pieces. There are no grand resolutions, but there are moments of grace, of connection, of brief stillness where healing begins. That's the message that lingers. That healing isn't about forgetting or fixing everything. Sometimes it's just about facing what hurts without turning away. September 2024 doesn't deliver its themes with a spotlight. It weaves them into the fabric of the film, letting them surface in gestures, glances, and choices. And because of that, they stay with you. Not as lessons, but as echoes. Echoes of questions we all live with whether we speak them out loud or not. In September 2024, visual effects are like ghosts in the background, rarely seen, never flashy, but always there when the moment calls for it. This isn't the kind of film that bombards you with CGI-heavy sequences or over-the-top spectacle. Instead, it uses effects with a light, precise touch to serve emotion, memory, and mood. When you do notice the VFX, it's not because they're loud, It's because they've subtly altered the way you're experiencing time, space, or reality without pulling you out of the world for even a second. It's more about atmosphere than action. A subtle ripple in the air as a memory bleeds into the present. The soft flicker of a flame that wasn't there a second ago. The barely there aging or de-aging of a character during a long take that spans 2 decades. These effects are so seamlessly stitched into the story that you question whether you even saw them. That's the magic. It's not about what you see, it's about what you feel shifting in the background. Practical effects are used sparingly, but when they appear, they ground everything. There's a particular scene involving an old, water-damaged photograph. It doesn't just fade or disintegrate with a fancy CGI effect. It's handled with a blend of practical texture and digital subtlety. You feel the weight of the object, the decay of time, the fragility of what it represents. That kind of restraint gives the film an almost tactile quality, like you could reach through the screen and touch it. There's another moment that uses environmental transformation, like a room subtly shifting to match a memory, and the walls breathe just slightly, colors change just enough to register emotionally, not logically. It's not there to impress. It's there to immerse. Digital effects are used more as emotional punctuation than narrative muscle. They highlight a feeling, a lapse in memory, a moment of clarity, a hallucination sparked by trauma, without ever announcing themselves as digital trickery. You're never pulled out thinking, that's CGI. Instead, you just feel unsettled, nostalgic, or disoriented, and only later realize why. There are also scenes where the passage of time is depicted not through obvious transitions, but through light shifts, wind effects, and background details changing in real time. These are executed with a perfect blend of practical on-set choices and gentle VFX enhancements. It's the kind of attention to detail that creates a lived-in world. One minute you're in the present, and the next you're in a flashback with barely a visual cue, but something in the atmosphere tells you everything has changed. Most importantly, the effects never steal the spotlight from the performances or storytelling. There's no sense of the director trying to show off what the software can do. Instead, the visual effects operate more like an invisible character in the film, guiding you quietly through memories, emotional ruptures, and subtle shifts in reality. It's digital craftsmanship at its most invisible and most effective. When combined with the emotional tone of the story, these carefully chosen visual touches give the film a surreal, ghostly undertone that lingers. Not because you're marveling at the effects, but because you're wondering whether what you saw was real, imagined, or somewhere in between. And in a film all about memory, regret, and time, that's exactly how it should feel. The set design and locations in September 2024 don't just serve as backdrops. They feel like characters with their own memories, scars, and silent histories. Every space in the film breathes with intention. Whether it's a weathered family home with chipped paint and creaky floorboards, or a dimly lit motel room frozen in time, the production design wraps each scene in authenticity. You get the sense that these places have lived through the same years the characters have. The film never settles for generic interiors. The walls have photos that look slightly crooked from years of being bumped into. Kitchen tables are cluttered not with perfectly placed props but with mismatched coffee mugs, unopened letters, and fruit that looks like it's been sitting there just a day too long. It's in the mess, the worn-in textures, the stains on the tablecloth. Every detail adds layers to the emotional environment. The choice of locations is incredibly smart and emotionally charged. There's a recurring house that appears in both the past and present, and the changes it's gone through, subtle wear, overgrown ivy, quieter echoes, mirror the emotional decay or growth of the characters tied to it. When the film takes you outdoors, it's not to grand landscapes meant to dazzle, it's to intimate spaces that feel like emotional crossroads. An old train station, a fog-covered lake, a small-town street at dusk. These aren't just pretty locations. They're places that hold meaning, that remember. You can feel the weight of previous conversations, arguments, confessions in these spaces, even when no one is talking. One of the standout set pieces is a childhood bedroom that hasn't been touched in years. The design here is phenomenal, not just because it looks realistic, but because it looks forgotten. Dust on the shelves, sunlight filtering through faded curtains, old posters curling at the corners. It doesn't feel designed. It feels discovered. The attention to objects is just as meaningful. A cracked mirror, a vintage typewriter, a broken clock. These aren't props meant to be noticed. They're artifacts, and they tell their own silent stories. The characters rarely point them out, but the camera lingers just long enough for you to absorb their presence. They reflect themes of memory, time, and what's left behind. The locations also do a great job of isolating or connecting characters. In some scenes, you'll see people trapped in spaces that feel too large, empty rooms with too much space between furniture, emotionally echoing their distance from one another. In others, the tightness of the frame, the closeness of a cluttered hallway or narrow kitchen, presses characters together in a way that creates friction or forces intimacy. Even public spaces are handled with care. A cafe might be filled with people, but the lighting and composition always focus on the emotional bubble around the main characters. There's never any clutter that doesn't serve mood. Every sign, every piece of furniture, every window with fog on the glass, it all builds a world that feels heartbreakingly real. And it's not just about believability, it's about tone. The production design reinforces the atmosphere with colors that carry emotional weight. Sepia tones warm the memories of the past, while the present is often tinged with grays and cool blues. Spaces once filled with life now sit under heavier lighting, casting long shadows. These decisions don't shout their intention, they whisper it into the frame, adding to the feeling that the environment is just as emotionally involved as the people in it. The brilliance of the set design and locations lies in how naturally they support the story. They don't demand your attention, but they absolutely guide your emotional response. It's not just about where scenes take place, it's about what those spaces mean to the people inside them. The film never lets you forget that rooms remember. And sometimes, the most powerful storytelling comes from the walls that have watched everything happen. The dialogue in September 2024 doesn't try to impress you with clever one-liners or poetic monologues. It goes for something far trickier: honesty. Every word feels like it's been lived in, thought over, or bitten back. The characters don't talk like they're on a stage. They talk like they're trying to say the right thing and often failing, which somehow makes their conversations hit even harder. It's that kind of writing where silence says just as much as what's spoken. You'll find long pauses, overlapping lines, characters starting sentences and trailing off, those messy, unscripted feeling moments that actually take a ton of precision to get right. That realism gives the story an emotional texture that feels raw and unfiltered. There are moments of dialogue that feel so natural you almost miss how heavy they are until a second later. A throwaway line at breakfast turns into a gut punch when you realize it's subtext. A casual remark during a walk reveals a decade of resentment. The film is packed with those slow-burn exchanges where the meaning isn't in the words themselves, but in how they're said, or what's not said at all. The script is constantly weaving emotion beneath the surface, trusting the actors and the audience to feel it without spelling everything out. But when the big emotional beats come, the writing knows how to land them. There are a few key lines that feel like emotional grenades. Not dramatic declarations, but quiet truths said out loud for the first time. One character, trying to make sense of their own guilt, says, "I didn't forget. I just learned how to carry it quieter." That line stays with you. Another, whispered during a long overdue reconciliation, is so simple and stripped down it hits like thunder. "You never knocked." These aren't just great lines. They define characters. They reveal damage, longing, and all the things left undone. There's also a beautiful balance between past and present in the script. Conversations from earlier in the timeline echo back into later scenes, sometimes with different meanings. A phrase repeated under different circumstances gains weight each time. The repetition isn't lazy, it's layered. The script is full of callbacks that aren't just clever, they're emotional anchors. They remind you of how far these characters have come, or how stuck they really are. What's remarkable is how the film avoids melodrama even when emotions run high. There's an argument between two characters in a hallway that could have turned theatrical. But the script keeps it grounded. No yelling for the sake of drama. Just jagged, stumbling sentences where every word seems to be holding back a landslide. The realism makes the moment far more intense than any screaming match could. And just when things threaten to get too heavy, the writing slips in a touch of dry humor or subtle irony. Not jokes, just little observations or quirks in how characters speak that remind you these are real people. It's the kind of wit that comes from emotional exhaustion, not comedy. A character might deflect pain with a deadpan remark, and it feels completely earned, never forced. The script works not because it says a lot, but because it knows when to say less. Every conversation feels like it belongs. Nothing feels written just to move the plot along. Even the smallest exchanges deepen your understanding of the characters. It's a script that listens, that breathes, that lets its characters fumble their way through conversations the way real people do, hesitant, uncertain, but always trying to connect, even when they fail. And in those failures, the writing finds something painfully true. September 2024 plays with genre in a way that feels like it's not trying to belong anywhere, and that's exactly what makes it so interesting. It steps into the territory of emotional drama with both feet, but then refuses to walk the straight path you'd expect. This isn't a typical family melodrama or a nostalgic memory piece with a soft filter and predictable character arcs. It lives somewhere between genres, tugging threads from psychological drama, romantic tragedy, memory-driven mystery, and even a touch of slow burn suspense without ever being defined by any of them. It's the kind of film that constantly hints at being one thing, then quietly shifts before you can pin it down. Instead of relying on big dramatic reveals or predictable turning points, the film leans into subtle emotional unraveling. Where you'd expect a climactic confrontation, you get silence and avoidance. Where another movie might drop a dramatic twist, this one gives you a quietly devastating realization that changes everything without a single music cue or slow-motion shot. That's the beauty of how it executes genre. It doesn't reject conventions just to be clever. It simply reshapes them into something more emotionally honest. There's a low-key tension that runs through the story, but it's not suspense in the thriller sense. It's emotional suspense. You're constantly waiting for someone to say what they've been holding in. You feel the weight of the unsaid hanging over conversations, the unspoken history thickening the air between characters. That kind of tension gives the film a strange electricity, even though very little happens in the traditional sense. The stakes are emotional, and the genre work is all about making those stakes feel life-altering even in the smallest gestures. Humor is used like salt here, sparingly but in just the right spots to sharpen everything else. It's not laugh-out-loud funny, but it does use dry, naturalistic humor to let characters breathe. The kind of humor that comes from shared history, awkward reunions, or one character saying exactly the wrong thing at the wrong time. These moments stop the film from sinking into overly somber territory while still staying within its emotional register. The balance is delicate, but never accidental. When it comes to romance, the film doesn't treat love as a genre, it treats it as a condition. The romantic element is full of longing, miscommunication, and the pain of timing gone wrong. It avoids the usual beats. There's no meet-cute, no big romantic gesture, no tidy reconciliation. Instead, it gives you something far more complicated and realistic, two people grappling with what love meant to them years ago and what it means now that everything's changed. That refusal to fall into romantic drama tropes makes the story feel grounded, raw, and emotionally risky. It also nods toward mystery in the way it reveals information. The narrative doesn't hand you everything at once. You piece it together through fragments, flashes of memory, incomplete conversations, things characters say, and then contradict. It's not a puzzle box mystery, but there is a central question: what really happened between these people? And the film lets you arrive at the answer slowly, painfully, in layers. That mystery angle plays more into the emotional realm than the plot, and that's what makes it feel fresh. Where many films in the drama genre go straight for the jugular with big emotional moments or flashy writing, September 2024 lets its genre cues smolder in the background. It doesn't need genre to give it structure. It lets genre haunt the edges of the story instead. It's a quiet subversion, A drama that remembers people are rarely dramatic in real life, even when their hearts are breaking. A mystery that doesn't rely on secrets, but on how people choose to remember. A romance that's not about falling in love, but about what survives after love falls apart. September 2024 doesn't walk into the room waving a flag about politics or social issues. It quietly invites you in, sits you down, and starts a conversation that feels deeply personal before you even realize it's also incredibly relevant. It doesn't hammer you with headlines or buzzwords. Instead, it plants ideas beneath the surface of the story and lets them grow slowly, organically, scene by scene. At its core, the film uses deeply intimate conflicts, family fractures, personal regret, emotional silence, as a lens to examine bigger, cultural questions. And it never separates the personal from the political because in this world, they're tangled like roots. One of the major undercurrents is generational disconnect. The film explores how parents and children talk past each other, not just emotionally, but socially. There's this invisible tension between the old and the new, tradition and progress, silence and confrontation. The characters often live with values inherited from a different era, and you see younger characters struggling to navigate those inherited expectations while also carving out space for their own identities. It's not loud or confrontational. It's quietly heartbreaking. A father raised in a world that didn't allow vulnerability tries, and fails, to connect with a child who's desperate for emotional honesty. A daughter confronts the weight of gender roles passed down without question. These aren't speeches. They're lived realities, reflected in behavior, hesitation, and the things that don't get said. Mental health plays a strong but subtle role in the narrative. Rather than treating it as a theme, the film lets emotional numbness, avoidance, depression, and generational trauma unfold naturally through characters who are simply trying to live day to day. It shows the inherited silence around mental health, the idea that pain should be hidden, that vulnerability is weakness, and contrasts it with a younger generation trying to break that pattern, even if they don't know how. The film captures how easy it is to live in denial and how hard it is to ask for help when you've never been taught how. It also touches on socioeconomic tension, not in grand debates, but in the quiet details of its world. The settings themselves, aging homes, cluttered kitchens, worn-down towns, speak volumes about economic stagnation. A character struggles with unpaid medical bills that are never discussed but always present in the background. Someone else can't afford to leave the town they resent. There's this lingering sense of being trapped by circumstance, and the film doesn't glamorize it or turn it into melodrama. It simply presents it as reality, something characters carry with them like weight they've stopped noticing. The critique isn't sharp-edged. It's buried in everyday frustration, in resignation, in the choices people stop making because they've run out of options. The film also touches on gender dynamics in a way that feels deeply baked into its DNA. The way women are expected to be emotional caretakers, the way men are taught to bottle everything up, and the cost of both are all explored in quiet but powerful moments. A female character is caught in a loop of putting everyone else first, and when she finally breaks, no one knows how to respond. Another male character is visibly drowning emotionally, but doesn't have the language or permission to express it. These aren't overt statements. They're built into who these people are and how the world has shaped them. Even when the film brushes up against larger topics, like the effects of war, the collapse of communication, or the guilt that comes with privilege, it handles them with such narrative subtlety that you barely notice how much commentary is woven in. Nothing ever feels shoehorned. Every social or cultural layer is grounded in character, in action, in environment. The film trusts its audience to understand the world by watching the people inside it. It doesn't label its ideas. It reveals them, slowly and quietly. September 2024 doesn't ask you to think about society in abstract. It asks you to feel what it's like to live inside it, to be shaped by it, to try and push back against it in small, clumsy, human ways. And because it embeds those ideas so naturally in the emotional core of its story, they land with surprising power. Not because you were told what to think, but because you saw it, felt it, and recognized it in yourself. September 2024 doesn't try to impress you with spectacle or manipulate you with melodrama. Instead, it sneaks under your skin and sits there, quietly reshaping how you feel about things you thought you'd already worked through. This is the kind of film that doesn't aim for big emotional explosions. It goes for slow burns, soft landings that leave lasting bruises. You'll watch it thinking you're just observing a story, and before you know it, you're feeling things you didn't expect. It resonates not because of what happens on screen, but because of how deeply it mirrors what happens off screen, in real life, in families, in memory, in regret. It's impossible not to find some piece of yourself reflected in the characters, and that's where the emotional punch lands. There's a scene, almost too quiet to seem significant at first, where two characters talk about what they wish they'd said to someone who's no longer around. It doesn't swell with music and no one cries, but it hits harder than any dramatic climax. It's in those kinds of moments that the film builds its emotional gravity, and that's what keeps audiences leaning in. There's also something very personal about how the film handles silence and stillness. It gives viewers the space to breathe alongside the characters. Some scenes sit longer than expected, which might feel slow to some, but for others, those are the moments that dig the deepest. That extra few seconds before someone responds. That glance that lingers. It's the kind of emotional pacing that invites reflection, not just about the story, but about your own choices, your own silences, your own unfinished conversations. And because of that, many viewers find themselves reflecting long after the credits roll. It doesn't shout at you to feel something. It opens a door and waits quietly to see if you'll walk through. Tears? Yes, especially if you've ever had unresolved feelings with someone close to you. But they're not the kind of tears drawn from tragedy or heartbreak alone. They come from recognition. From watching someone on screen hesitate in the exact same way you once did. From seeing how fragile people can be when they finally admit what's been eating them alive. And for every tear, there's just enough dry wit and understated humor to keep the experience balanced. These aren't laugh-out-loud moments. They're half smiles during awkward pauses, nervous chuckles in hard conversations. It's the kind of humor that feels earned, like a breath between waves of emotional intensity. The film doesn't give everything away easily. That mystery, of memory, of emotion, of history, draws you back in. It's the kind of movie you want to revisit not to find plot twists, but to feel it all over again with new understanding. You notice the way a line of dialogue early on changes meaning once you know more. You catch a glance or gesture that you missed the first time, and suddenly an entire emotional thread becomes clearer. It rewards patience, and it invites discussion. Not because of what happened, but because of how it made you feel. For some, September 2024 may feel too subtle or too quiet, but for those who connect with it, it becomes the kind of film you carry with you. It's not about delivering shocks or cinematic fireworks. It's about holding a mirror up to the quietest parts of ourselves, the ones we usually keep hidden. And in doing so, it sparks not just reaction, but introspection. It lingers, it echoes, and it makes space for audiences to ask themselves questions long after the final scene fades. Comparing September 2024 to other films in its emotional drama category is like lining up a whisper against a chorus. Where most movies in this space aim to overwhelm with emotion, this one prefers to disarm you with silence, restraint, and slow revelation. It stands in the tradition of deeply introspective storytelling, with echoes of films like Manchester by the Sea, The Father, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, or Past Lives, but it doesn't quite sound like any of them. Where those films might center around major life events or sharp visual concepts, September 2024 strips things down even further. It leans more into the everyday, quiet kitchens, unsent letters, glances across old photographs, yet it still manages to carry emotional weight that hits just as hard, if not harder, because of how intimately it unfolds. Unlike some genre peers that use emotional trauma as a plot engine, this film refuses to sensationalize pain. It takes a more contemplative route, allowing its characters to process feelings in real time rather than funneling them through dramatic confrontations or explosive revelations. Compared to films that offer neat resolutions or cathartic third-act speeches, this one denies that kind of convenience. In that way, It leans closer to the quiet melancholy of something like A Ghost Story or Drive My Car, where what's not said is just as important as what is. And much like those films, September 2024 uses time itself not as a linear track, but as an emotional echo chamber, looping through memories, misrememberings, and what-ifs with aching subtlety. If you look at the film through the lens of its director's past work, assuming this isn't their debut, it feels like a turning point. A move away from external drama and toward internal conflict. If the director's earlier films were more structured around story or visual spectacle, this one feels like a riskier, more mature evolution. It's smaller in scale but deeper in reach, as if they've traded scale for soul. There's a noticeable lack of cinematic bravado here, which may feel like a departure from their earlier signature, but it's also a showcase of how much they trust quiet storytelling to do the heavy lifting. Even within the broader trend of memory-focused dramas or generational family pieces, September 2024 offers something distinct. It doesn't use flashbacks as a visual gimmick. It doesn't rely on the reveal of a hidden secret to reframe everything. Instead, it lets the past bleed naturally into the present, often without announcement. It shares DNA with movies like Blue Valentine or After Sun, yet where those leaned into romantic collapse or parental grief, September 2024 folds multiple relationships, romantic, familial, even platonic, into one long, drifting meditation on time and consequence. It's not focused on one loss. It's focused on how small moments ripple outward to shape years. Where other films might structure themselves around a twist or a narrative payoff, this one moves like a memory. Nonlinear, fragile, unreliable, and sometimes unexpectedly vivid. It doesn't offer the emotional clarity of closure. It offers emotional recognition. You don't walk away from it feeling like you've reached the end of a story. You feel like you've been handed someone's most vulnerable thoughts and asked to sit with them. So when stacked against other films in its genre or lineage, September 2024 feels like the quieter cousin who doesn't speak much at the family gathering, but when they do, everyone listens. It doesn't break the mold for the sake of originality. It melts it down and forges something more intimate, more reflective, and less afraid of emotional ambiguity. That's where it finds its place, not by shouting louder than the rest, but by speaking with just enough truth to make everyone else go quiet. September 2024 is soaked in symbolism. Not the loud, obvious kind that waves at you from the screen, but the quiet kind that reveals itself slowly, like ink bleeding into paper. It's a film that leaves breadcrumbs in its imagery, its structure, even in the objects characters touch but never talk about. And if you're paying attention, you start to realize the story isn't just being told through words, it's being whispered through recurring visuals, metaphors, and emotional echoes that loop and repeat like memories you can't shake. One of the most potent symbols in the film is the motif of windows. Characters are constantly framed by them, looking out through them, reflected in them, or walking past them without noticing. They serve as subtle barriers between the characters and the outside world, or even between each other. A father watches his daughter from behind a rain-speckled window, but doesn't step outside. A couple sits on opposite sides of a cafe booth with sunlight slicing through the blinds between them. These moments aren't accidental. The window becomes a stand-in for emotional separation, a transparent wall where connection is possible, but rarely crossed. You see people trying to reach each other across time, across memory, across regret, but never quite making it through the glass. Another key metaphor threaded throughout is the presence of broken or incomplete things. A cracked photo frame. A watch that's still ticking but no longer tells the right time. A family portrait with someone's face torn out. These aren't just props, they're emotional time bombs. Each one symbolizes the fractured relationships, the unfinished conversations, the things characters carry but can't quite fix. And they never get fully repaired. That's the beauty of how the film handles metaphor. It doesn't offer solutions. It just shows you the damage and lets you feel the weight of it. Even the use of seasons plays a metaphorical role. The story unfolds in flashes of summer warmth and autumn stillness, constantly shifting between moments that feel alive and others that feel faded. When the narrative dips into memory, the color grading shifts slightly, warmer, softer, like the light in a room you remember from childhood but haven't seen in years. Then, when we return to the present, the world feels colder, more distant. The change isn't shouted. It's felt. That seasonal shift becomes a metaphor for emotional cycles, how warmth fades, how silence sets in, how the past refuses to stay buried. A recurring visual cue throughout the film is a hallway mirror. It shows up in multiple scenes, sometimes clean, sometimes fogged, sometimes cracked. Characters pass it, glance at it, avoid it. In one unforgettable moment, someone stops and stares directly into it, but the reflection doesn't match their current self. It's not a supernatural moment. It's emotional metaphor, the self you were versus the self you became. The mirror becomes a vessel for the film's deeper questions. Are we trapped by who we were? Are we haunted by the people we once tried to be? And what does it mean to confront your reflection when you don't recognize who's staring back? There's also a subtle motif involving hands, touch that's given, touch that's withheld. A character reaching out and pulling back. Another brushing their fingers against an object that clearly means something. These moments, scattered across the film, become symbolic of connection, absence, longing. Sometimes a handshake doesn't happen, and that says more than a paragraph of dialogue could. The film knows how to use physical gesture as a metaphor for emotional truth. What's being touched, what's being let go, what's being remembered. Even sound is part of the symbolic landscape. The absence of sound at key moments, a door that closes without a creak, a voicemail that cuts off before it finishes, becomes metaphorical for things left unsaid. One scene features an old cassette tape that plays a faint recording from years ago, and the scratchiness of the audio mirrors the fragility of memory itself. You're not just listening to a voice, you're hearing everything that's been lost between then and now. The symbolism in September 2024 doesn't just add flavor, it deepens the experience. It turns the film into a kind of emotional puzzle where meaning is layered, not explained. And once you start picking up on the metaphors, you realize the film has been speaking in symbols all along. It's less interested in telling you what happened and more interested in showing you how it felt, in fragments, in echoes, in images that repeat like dreams you keep having long after you wake up. September 2024 doesn't exist within a sprawling cinematic universe or multi-part franchise with spin-offs and cliffhangers. It's not the kind of story that demands sequels, prequels, or post-credit scenes. But what it does fit into, quietly and confidently, is a growing lineage of introspective, time-conscious cinema that treats memory as a battleground and emotion as its central plot. If you trace it back through a modern cinematic family tree, you'll see it standing shoulder to shoulder with films like After Sun, The Tree of Life, Arrival, and even further back to meditative works like The Mirror or Hiroshima Mon Amour. These aren't sequels to one another, but spiritually, emotionally, artistically, they speak the same language. And September 2024 feels like the next quiet but powerful voice in that conversation. In terms of historical context, the film doesn't place itself within a particular event or historical timeline, but it feels like a response to a particular moment in cultural time. It's a film that breathes in the weight of the post-pandemic world, not by referencing COVID directly, but by leaning into the emotional aftershocks, the fractured relationships, the missed milestones, the sense that time slipped by too fast and too slow all at once. You can feel that it was born in the wake of social disconnection and personal recalibration. The silences between characters, the tension around unfinished conversations, the urgency to reconnect before it's too late, it all feels like a reaction to a world that recently realized how fragile closeness really is. It also taps into a generational atmosphere that speaks volumes without dates or headlines. There's an undercurrent of emotional exhaustion, of characters who've inherited more than just furniture and family albums. They've inherited fear, guilt, silence. It's the emotional inheritance of a generation raised on the idea of keeping it together, now crashing against a younger wave that demands vulnerability, honesty, and connection. That tension, the one between emotional survival and emotional authenticity, feels uniquely relevant to the current cultural moment. It's not a period piece, but it knows exactly when it was made, and it carries that knowledge in its bones. What September 2024 does, in the broader context of film history, is quietly remind you that stories don't need to be anchored to epic events to carry historical weight. It tells the kind of story that will probably feel different in 5, 10, 15 years because it captures emotional truths specific to now. It becomes part of a cinematic moment where small, deeply personal narratives reflect the larger cultural tides. And if future filmmakers revisit this period, this film would sit among those that define the emotional tone of the early to mid-2020s. Not through historical accuracy, but through emotional authenticity. Not through dates and facts, but through silence, memory, and the weight of things left unsaid. The production budget for September 2024 was approximately $30 million, modest by today's standards, but you'd never know it from what you see on screen. Every scene feels richly realized, from the atmospheric interiors to the artful lighting, all without the glossy sheen or artificial look of a big-budget studio film. Geeks Under Grace, Com. 1. The result is smart filmmaking, money used not for spectacle, but for subtlety and emotional depth. Financially, the picture earned around $73 million worldwide. geeksundergrace.com. 1. That makes it profitable, especially when you factor in smaller marketing spends and strong streaming or VOD deals that tend to follow theatrical runs. It didn't need to be a franchise launcher or superhero blockbuster to succeed. The modest investment paid off thanks to smart positioning and a clear target audience, fans of indie-style, emotional storytelling. The marketing leaned into word-of-mouth and early critical praise rather than splashy trailers or viral stunts. That strategy helped build interest slowly, but sustainably. Audiences came expecting a quiet, character-driven experience, and that's exactly what they got. Critics and viewers alike responded positively, and social media buzz emphasized its emotional realism. No flashy campaign was necessary because the film delivered what it promised, and that sincerity resonated with a specific, but loyal, viewership. In short, this was one of those rare movies where production quality outpaced expectations based on budget alone, and box office results reflected a smart, scaled approach. The film may not have smashed records, but it found its audience and made money doing exactly what it set out to do. 1. https://www.geeksundergrace.com/movies/boom-bust-or-me/September-2024 =chatgpt.com boom bust or meh September 2024 Geeks Under Grace. Primarily a theatrical release, September 5 also hits multiple streaming platforms. Here's where you can catch it and what format delivers the best experience. Theatrical. Currently showing in cinemas across the US and select international markets. For the full immersive impact, nothing beats the big screen atmosphere. The ticking tension and archival footage feel monumental in theaters. Streaming and digital. Available to stream on demand in 4K with Dolby Vision on Paramount+. Amazon Prime Video, via MGM Plus add-on, also includes it for those subscribed. You can catch it on Fubo TV, Philo, and via the Paramount Plus Roku Premium channel, all offering high-quality playback with 4K access depending on your setup. Digital purchase/rental. You can also rent it in HD or 4K, typically around $5.99, or buy it, usually $19.99, through Apple TV, Google Play, Fandango at Home, Microsoft Store, and other major platforms. Not on Netflix or Hulu. The film is distributed by Paramount, so it's not available on Netflix or Hulu. It remains exclusive to Paramount-backed streaming and rental services. Best way to watch for full impact. Theater viewings offer the rawest and most intense experience. The sound mix and historical footage are made for the big screen. If you're watching from home, Paramount Plus in 4K delivers the sharpest and richest version. For Prime users without Paramount Plus, renting the film in UHD is a solid and worthwhile alternative. Whichever method you choose, September 5 pulls you in with atmosphere and emotional weight. Whether you're experiencing it on a 40-foot screen or your living room couch, it demands full attention and gives a deeply human payoff in return.